Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fourth episode of LinkedIn Live video series, Breaking New Ground. I'm Aditya Shankar, co-author of the Coronavirus Business Impact Report and a content marketing manager at MoEngage. Now, today's session is specifically about judging the impact of COVID-19 on businesses in India and the Middle East region. Viewers who have joined in from other geographies, don't be disheartened. We have something for everyone in this session. Also, before we start, I would like to quickly share two basic rules. Number one is you can follow this entire conversation and the discussion even beyond this on the hashtag Breaking New Ground. Of course, feel free to share that with your professional circles. Number two, since this is a live broadcast, you can pitch in your questions anytime in the comment section, and we'll be taking them towards the end of the session. So I think, yeah, those were the just two basic simple rules. I think that's good enough for us. So just to give a brief introduction to this entire session, I think it's been over like 2 months now that all of us went into lockdown, and to prevent the spread of coronavirus, a lot of governments went into like complete lockdowns. And though governments have been doing their part, we really wanted to understand the entire impact of COVID-19 on online businesses, right, worldwide. And so in order to pursue this objective, what we did was we really went mega scale. We partnered with Apptopia, one of the biggest names in app intelligence worldwide. And we took out this big report, the Coronavirus Business Impact Report, which covered 1.5 billion users across 12 different industry verticals and 5 different continents. We really went mega scale. And just to speak about India and Middle East, I think 2/5 of the entire user base, like close to 600 million of that, came from India and Middle East. So we have substantial database in order to establish consumer behavior with the advent of COVID-19. So to discuss all of this and even more, I have with me the Chief Business Officer of MoEngage, Yash Reddy, with me to discuss the report findings, pandemic strategies, and much more with me today. Welcome, Yash. How are you?
Hey Adi, thanks for the introduction. I'm doing great. I guess it feels good to finally step out and at least take a stroll, thanks to the relaxed rules of lockdown off late. But it's great to be here today to share some thoughts on how COVID has been impacting some of the businesses that we work with, some of the apps that we've seen growing, some of the apps that we're seeing slow down on, and all of that. And I guess you and the team have done a fantastic job of looking through like 600 million plus users across all different industries in India and Middle East. So I guess let's get started with maybe giving our viewers a flavor of what kind of industries have we covered in this report, and what are some of the key insights that we've been able to come to, Adi?
Sure, Yash. So I think in terms of industry verticals, we covered 12 different industry verticals. Most of us, primarily into B2C, telecom, e-commerce, edtech, BFSI, healthcare, OTT apps, mobility, travel, hospitality, social, real estate, food delivery apps. So yeah, I think we covered a lot of different industry verticals. And of course, for our viewers who want to, really go in depth and want to see, really the consumer behavior trends, I would really suggest that they download the entire report, which is in the comment section. But in terms of, the takeaways from this particular session of ours, I think there are some three main takeaways. The way I see it, first is, right, like know your industry. Where does your industry lie on the COVID impact quadrant? And I'll be quickly, getting onto it. I think both of us will be explaining a bit more about the entire impact quadrant, and that's what this today's discussion is about. But yeah, first one is definitely that, where does your industry lie, in which quadrant, whether it's in, explosion, growth, slowdown, or emergence. Second would be to, kind of learn more from the campaign stories of brands who are really doing, like even in times of, the pandemic, they have still been able to engage their users and grow into, and that's something substantial. So we'll be taking a close look at that. And number three again is, to establish much more data driven insights, because as marketers, as decision makers, we kind of, take decisions based on hunches, and we really want to debunk the myths around hunch based decisions and give a more data driven perspective towards it. So Yash, yeah, I think yeah we are good to get started. Just if you have any opening views.
No, I think just a couple of housekeeping stuff. I guess for people who have joined us late and people who are still joining, I guess the entire video recording for this session will be available on our LinkedIn page post the session as well. And yeah, I think you can feel free to add comments at any point of time if you have any thoughts about the discussion or any insights that you might have about some of the industries that we're discussing today. Or if you want us to answer any of the questions that you might have, please post that in the comment section, and I guess we'll get to it towards the later end of the session. Right. And I think with that, let's get started, Adi. Maybe let's just pull up the COVID quadrant and let's get started with that.
Definitely. So just to, for everyone's understanding here, the impact quadrant has two main axes. I think on the x-axis, you have the downloads, and on the y-axis, you have the active users. So we really wanted to map the entire, performance of different industries based on these two key metrics. Download, of course, suggests the, the number of new users that you're onboarding, and active users is more towards, the entire set of users who are active on your platform. So if I have to, divide the entire, the one big quadrant into four, you know, subsections of it, the topmost and the rightmost one would be the explosion one, obviously, because these industries have seen, a boom in both the downloads and the active users. Coming in an anti-clockwise direction, I think the second one towards the left would be, the growth quadrant, which is still a favorable section to be in such times, because though your downloads have taken a hit, you're still able to retain a lot of active users on your platform. Coming in the same fashion, I think the third quadrant, in the anti-clock direction, is the slowdown quadrant, which has been, like, a lot of brands have fallen into this quadrant, and they have basically taken a hit both in terms of downloads and active users. And the fourth quadrant is emergence. Industries which have just come over the horizon, who have seen maybe a boost in downloads, but not so much as in active users. Predominantly, the Indian, I think the mobile ecosystem is such that most brands, we have a high mobile penetration. So we did not really see a lot of industries come up in the emergence quadrant for these two regions. But that, in a nutshell, is the explanation of the COVID impact quadrant. I think, yeah, so if I have to come back to the entire data side of this quadrant, I'm sure I think you can add a lot of it, because you have been in the industry and you have worked closely with a lot of brands in India and Middle East. So what do your practical on-ground insights say about this?
Sure. I think even from majority of the feedback that we've received for the quadrant and from what we've been hearing from a lot of our customers and prospects as well, the quality of the research is absolutely on point, right? I mean, I think most of us agree with some of the placements of the industries that we've seen here. Obviously, I think there have been some surprises in the quadrants and way some of the industries are placed in the quadrants, and I guess probably we'll spend some more time discussing through some of these industries today. But at a high level, yeah, I mean, it's distressing to see how, like, travel and hospitality, mobility have been, very severely impacted both in India as well as Middle East. I think a lot of them have completely come to a standstill. The business is pretty much zero. I mean, they're really, a lot of them are key customers for us, and typically we see an uptick in business at this time of the year. But yeah, I guess hopefully some of them will come out stronger post this entire lockdown and the entire COVID impact, right? But I think one of the things that stood out for me when I started looking at this entire slowdown quadrant was, I mean, going into the lockdown, it just felt that food industry and the entire delivery apps in general could probably end up doing well. But if you look at the entire, I mean, data and the entire numbers that we've seen for India and Middle East, we see that food delivery is pretty much in the slowdown segment. And I mean, what are some of the things that you've noticed from a data standpoint on that segment at a high level, Adi?
Agreed, Yash. I think interestingly, for the whole month of March, for which we compiled this data report, most of the on delivery, food on demand delivery apps, even food delivery apps, in specifically, their both their download and DAU numbers took a massive hit, and these were for big brand names like Zomato, Swiggy in India, and even Talabat in Middle East. So it has been an erratic downfall, and overall, both of them have both the active numbers and download, as I said, have dropped in March. Having said that, this industry is showing a very good comeback starting April. It's still not back to its the original pre-COVID numbers, but that's what we see from a data perspective. What do you see, the practical on-ground consumer behavior in this industry, Yash?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start with probably my personal insight, right? Like, I mean, I was probably one of the most avid users of all of these delivery apps, and I think there was a sudden shift to start cooking at home and make food at home, not order in. And I think that's a broader change in the consumer behavior we've seen across the country, right? I think people preferred a lot more of cooking at home, and the entire paranoia around delivery ordering in didn't clearly help the things as well. So I guess, and that consumer behavioral shift that we've seen, I guess it's here to stay for some time, right? I mean, it might take anywhere from, I don't know, like 6 months to 12 months for it to even go back to the levels that we've seen before COVID, right? In terms of the entire delivery orders. But I think, having said that, I think what's been really encouraging is if you look at most of these players like Swiggy, Zomato, Talabat, all of that, I think they led the charge in terms of diversifying into some of the new categories. They've been able to repurpose some of the delivery fleet at least, and the entire tech stack that they had to, I mean, to things away from food delivery as well, right? And we've seen how I mean, the entire Swiggy home screen now talks about just grocery delivery, meat delivery, essentials delivery, and things like that. And so is the case with Zomato and a couple of others, right? Like, and I think essentially all of these brands which are taking some of these initiatives are likely to bounce back at the quickest, right? And I guess that's one of the reasons why we started to see some uptick in numbers again in the month of April, right? And that's the key takeaway for me, if you ask me, right? Being agile, being quick, and I mean, if you remember opening some of these apps like Swiggy, right in April first week itself, we started seeing things like safety standards along with every particular every restaurant listed there. There was a separate section in terms of the most hygienic restaurants, right? Like, so you need to be really agile, really quick, and things like diversifying into some of these essential delivery. This is where the customer really needs you, right? So you're basically educating the customer about some of the shifts that are happening, giving them more comfort around things that they might be worried about, and these are strategies which will have long lasting benefits, right? And these are things that are here to stay, right? Having said that, I think while we're still in the slowdown segment, I did notice one of the things that I saw was real estate. Obviously, not so surprisingly, in India is in the slowdown segment. But if you look at Middle East part of it, right, I think I see that in the explosion quadrant. Why the stark difference between one in slowdown, one in explosion? What are some things happening there in the real estate side of it, Adi?
Great question, Yash. I think, as you said, right, real estate has raised a lot of eyebrows. And, there is no denying the fact that real estate has been one of the most majorly impacted industries. Uh, because if you just have to speak in terms of, the active users, the engagement for these brands, it was primarily offline, right? There is no way you can get out and do the house hunting right now. And in fact, the lockdown in India has been pretty rigid. Like, leave aside, house hunting, any kind of outdoor activity was stopped. So, but the difference in behavior for Middle East is particularly peculiar here because number one, the government restrictions for real estate, in the Middle East, specifically for countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE, were not so rigid if you are following all the regulations being set up by the government. So you can still go house hunting, you can still indulge in the business. but that still wouldn't explain that why, why are they in the explosion industry. And here is where, I really want to drive home the point that how such brands in the Middle East, specifically real estate brands in the Middle East, they went a step ahead in educating the users how they can still go for house visits with government rules in place.
Sure.
What are the different government laws around it? What are, government mandated guidelines? How to prepare your home for visits? And they did this across, multiple channels, not just blogs or, like a one-off webinar. They had like a definite content calendar, the entire brand messaging in place, and they really drove it really well. And just to think about it, a real estate brand doing webinars and being able to explode and keep the engagement still going is really good to know. And that's not just limited to, like, if I have to really bring home the point even a bit more further, the parent brand that owns Bayou and a couple of other real estate brands, like I think they own Zameen in Pakistan, they also own
Right.
Mubawab in North Africa. I think this group is called the EMPG Group, the Emerging Markets Property Group. They are doing good business. I think just the last week they announced some $150 million, funding by the OLX Group at over $1 billion evaluation. So that explains the unique behavior of these brands. Trying to bring the entire brand messaging, changing it, and really having the engagement high over there. So again, yes, circling back to I think I'm sure you have worked with a lot of brands and industries in the Middle East and India. What do you think about their strategy?
Sure. I think, I mean, you made a great point there in terms of, how the ability to come across as like an expert in your domain by providing the right kind of information, by, changing the entire brand messaging to a large extent to be with the consumers at this point of time, giving them the right kind of information that they would need during this phase. I think that's what really set apart some of these brands that you're talking about, right? And I think that's a huge lesson for a lot. I mean, a lot of companies in the slowdown quadrant, because if you're not able to do your regular business as usual activities, how do you still continue to maintain your market dominance? How do you still retain that mind share in terms of in your consumers, right? So, I mean, changing with your, looking at your entire brand messaging, looking at your entire communication strategies, and reworking all of that. I guess that's one big, change that I've seen from a lot of brands. And the other thing that I've also seen is what kind of communications are going out, right? And in terms of the ability to completely change the messaging. If I look at some of our customers as well, which you've also quoted in the report, be it Yatra, be it Tribo, some of these behavioral changes that we've seen with consumers, right? Like I will obviously have certain fears before I step into a hotel next time. So one of our customers, Tribo, did a lot of campaigns, a lot of infographics around how what kind of safety standards are they putting in place, what kind of health measures are they taking for their employees, for their hotels, and all of that. And over a period of time, they're trying to build this perception that, what, us as a brand, we resonate with safety, we resonate, we place a huge importance on hygiene, and that resonates over a period of time, right? And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we've seen brands like Oyo being able to engage with most of their users even in this lockdown phase, although their entire business has been shut. And that's a great achievement for me.
Definitely, I think, yeah, that's a great point made here. The ability to customize and personalize your communication and come across as an expert in your field. I think with this we can move over to the next quadrant, which is the growth quadrant. Again, I'd like to hear your first views on industries that are in this quadrant, Yash.
Sure, I guess not a lot of surprises here in terms of the growth quadrant, but I think one call out I just wanted to quickly make when I was looking at the quadrant as well is that when we're talking about online shopping in these quadrant, it's primarily delivery, grocery delivery apps, and essential online ordering apps. Obviously, I think in a lot of countries there are restrictions. At least in India, there are a lot of restrictions around the entire online shopping piece. So this is more from the essential delivery standpoint, right? But having said that, I think when we look at the other industry which is popping up here, not too surprising. I think a lot of us have a lot more time to spend on social media. We've seen more engagement on a lot of these platforms, but I guess going beyond the obvious of social media going being in the growth quadrant, why don't we also look at probably some of the companies that are doing really well, Adi, in terms of the social apps in both the regions, in India as well as Middle East.
Sure, yeah, sure. I think before I come to answer to your question, Jaydeep has a question for us here. Jaydeep will be
Sure.
attending to your question quickly. I think we are just, I think another, give us another 10 minutes. For any of our other viewers, if you have any questions popping up in your mind, feel free to, just put it up in the comment section. So yeah, I think coming back to your question, Yash, social media apps and which are the social media apps, who have grown the most in the times of COVID. So definitely the big five, right? The WhatsApp, the big five of our, the social media apps as we know it: WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. They have all seen huge success in terms of the overall activity. But two apps which have specifically, come over the horizon and like really drove a lot of activity were TikTok and Telegram. And Telegram, I understand, is not so much on the social media app, but more on the messaging front. But it has seen some excellent numbers in the Middle East. And as far as TikTok goes, I think there's no surprise there again, right? Like, I mean, the numbers are off the roof for TikTok. Everyone seems to be talking about it. While Instagram and Facebook, are trying to help, help local sellers by giving them virtual storefronts, and which is again in line with a lot of government standpoint, the government of India standpoint right now as well. But TikTok has been the platform for engagement, and a lot of celebs have been driving it. They have been joining in, and there's a new viral challenge every week. I think that's one of the reasons why the app has also been able to they have seen considerable inflows in their advertising revenue as well. Yes, sure. Feel free to add your points to it. How does this impact the marketers more from a user acquisition point of view, who are really seeing TikTok as a channel to do some of their acquisition related strategies there.
Sure. I guess this week's not been particularly great for TikTok. But leaving that aside, till I think till the end of last week, I mean, all of us have seen the phenomenal rise in terms of the overall engagement of on TikTok itself, right? Or people using TikTok to share media on Instagram, even the likes of David Warner and who not, right? And I think a lot of brands are increasingly looking at some of these new channels as a way to acquire users. But I guess one of the biggest call outs that I wanted to make today was also around the way we look at user acquisition spends, right? The way the entire marketing teams look at the acquisitions need to go beyond the top level metric of how many users are you acquiring, because I mean, you can spend more dollars and acquire a lot more users during this phase, but how do you sort of engage with them? How do you sort of keep the relationship going with them, and is it actually leading to incrementality over a period of time, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things that marketers need to keep in mind. Sure, I mean, if you have ad dollars to spend, I would say challenge yourself. Look at every single dollar that is being spent. Look at what was working a few weeks back. It may or may not be relevant as of today. Look at all the ad spends and see what makes more sense from a long-term user acquisition standpoint, and not just the short-term download standpoint, right? And I think also, because I mean, you will have to sustain the entire engagement through this COVID phase as well as post the COVID phase as well. And I guess that's one of the key things to keep in mind, right? So having said that, I think let's quickly move to the entire explosion quadrant itself, which ties into some of the questions that we're getting as well. I mean, not too many surprises here in terms of the explosion quadrant in itself. We see the entire video conferencing and all those apps gaining popularity. I mean, Zoom, obviously, I mean, the entire B2B video communication has completely moved to Zoom. And more surprisingly, I think Zoom has become the app of choice even for consumers, right? Like, I think they suddenly went from almost like I mean, 10, 20 million to almost like, I think they touched about 300 million participants on a single day. And that's the kind of scale that they're seeing, right? They've completely exploded overnight. We've also seen a lot of activity on apps like House Party, which are not just conferencing, but also, help you engage with your friends with games and a bunch of activities like that. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these apps are obviously in the explosion segment. Media and entertainment, again, no surprises there. A lot of us are spending a lot more time streaming things on Netflix, Amazon Prime, all of that. I mean, there's a bit of you know key thing here that we see a bit of decline in some of the music streaming, but video streaming is definitely increasing. I guess music streaming is more to do with decline in commute times and all of that. But yeah, video streaming is off the roof. And I think that's not a surprise at all, right? But I think one thing which definitely stood out for me when I looked at this quadrant on the whole, Adi,
Mhm.
is that the entire healthcare segment, which is the talk of the town today, it's somehow in the slowdown segment in India, but not so surprisingly, it's in the explosion segment in the Middle East. Any reason why we place this in the slowdown segment for India?
Sure, yeah. So from health and fitness, perspective, what we saw, and if I have to do a comparative study of this industry in India and Middle East, I think for brands in India, and these were big brands like CureFit or even Pharmeasy or MedLife, they had much more, like for at least for brands like CureFit, the major source of activity or engagement was primarily offline, right? Because the entire thing was the number of people who turn up for your classes and such stuff, and even CureFit used to run a lot of billboard ads and
Yeah.
stuff like that. uh, and I think that primarily took a overnight hit, right? Because with the sudden advent of lockdown, most of the healthcare, fitness centers were locked down. And I think that was one of the key reasons why in the month of March we saw this industry being hit a lot, specifically in India. Again, the timings differ for every country. Like in Middle East, the timings were not so sudden, and the rules did not come all of a sudden. But again, for brands in like in again for healthcare and fitness brands in Middle East, what we saw was that apps like 30 Day Fitness, these apps, they were primarily online. They had challenges which really forced you to engage in your own in your own home environment, if I have to say. So such brands really saw a huge explosion in Middle East, and 30 Day Fitness is a good example there. But what we have seen, post March and from mid April onwards, what we have seen is like healthcare brands and fitness brands, and even in India, they have seen a huge bounce back, right? And from a data point of view, of course. But Yash, coming back to you, what do you think these brands are doing right at the moment to bounce back so strongly?
Sure. I think probably to take cue from your example that you took around CureFit, right? I mean, if you look at the entire business model, it changed overnight. I mean, they were primarily all about working out at cult fit centers and all of that, and everything was shut overnight, right? I mean, and they had to completely pivot to an online presence. And I think some of these brands have been very resilient. They've done a great job with doing the entire change per se, right? So you've seen things like, why don't you work out with celebs, live training. They brought in some of the largest celebrities like, Jonty Rhodes, PV Sindhu, all of them trying to bring all of these celebrities to bring that feeling of working out live is as good as working out in an offline center. And I think this entire consumer behavior shift will take some time. But I think what they've also been doing right is also things like, experimenting with things like, say, energy meter, right? So gamifying the entire experience, giving that social proofing and validation for the users, rating the performance, which users can easily share. So that's sort of building a community feeling even in an online forum, and at the same time, when it's almost become like a race for productivity for all of us. People are actually, I see a lot of friends actually sharing the cult badges, saying that what, I ranked 45 today out of 1,000 people. And I think that for me is the biggest change in the month of April, right? And I think a lot of these apps, they've also tried to add things like grocery delivery, fitness brands delivery, and things like that. And I guess if you look at the broader theme of all of this, right, I feel one thing that's tying all of this together is the entire concept of retention as a key growth metric, right? So you can go ahead and do a lot of activities, you can spend millions of dollars, acquire thousands of users, but I think it's what's really important is how do you keep the entire consumers and customers engaged in the face of adversity, in the face of overnight shift in the business model, right? And at the same time, I think how do you engage with the customers without looking too opportunistic, right? And that's a considerable skill, I would say. And over a period of time, I think this will all add to the brand value and brand equity, right? Sooner or later, I mean, some of these brands are bound to reap benefits from all the efforts that they're putting in today. For I mean, for instance, things like working out at home is a behavioral shift that's likely to stay, right? So someone who's invested not just in the tech stack but the entire full spectrum is definitely going to reap rewards. And tomorrow, I won't be surprised if some of these brands choose to monetize some of these things they're doing as of today, right? So I won't be too surprised to see some of these brands which are doing things completely free of cost, moving to a freemium model or even to a premium model. And I guess that's a welcome change in the industry, right? I mean, these are long-term sustainable changes. More monetization is always good for a lot of these online brands, and I guess uh, those are some of the positive things that I have seen in the entire healthcare industry. And of course, if you look at some of the other apps which used to support telemedicine, I guess this is a shot in the arm, right? This is the perfect moment for a lot of these apps to take off in terms of the entire telemedicine and a lot of that. So yeah, I'm expecting a lot of explosion, and I think if we end up doing a refreshed version of this quadrant at some point of time, I would see health tech definitely in the explosion quadrant, even from an India perspective, right? So I think in the interest of time, probably we should maybe take a quick look at the questions, Adi. But thanks a lot for putting this entire quadrant together. I hope we've been able to give some perspective of how we arrived at this quadrant. What are some of the reasons why some of these industries are in a specific quadrant, right? And hopefully we've been able to share some examples that you guys all our viewers could relate to today. Adi, any closing thoughts before we open it up for questions?
Sure, Yash. I think great insights by you. I think I think the agenda of doing this session was basically to, go through some peculiar examples and set up some very, actionable strategies here, which we were definitely able to do in, like, with the clock ticking above us. But yeah, I think let's open the floor to discussions from our viewers as well. For those of you who are, were waiting till now, and if you have still questions coming up in your head, just feel free to put that up in the comment section. I think Jaideep was the first one to ask a question here, and his question for you, Yash, is COVID pushing technology company years ahead? For example, Zoom is gaining higher valuation and getting accepted by a lot of employers. Is it temporary or is it permanent?
I mean, I think some of these shifts we are seeing are likely to stay for years to come, right? Even if I look at some of the more traditional verticals like banking and financial services, which have been traditionally on tools like WebEx, and at all times the only remote conferencing tool they used to use was WebEx. But I think I would have done at least probably 15, 20 calls in the last 2 months, and surprisingly, most of them are very open to working on tools like Zoom. And I guess the entire remote working, the entire uh, working from home has been playing out quite well for a lot of companies. And I think that change is here to stay. And some of these companies like Zoom are likely to see these benefits for a long time. And I don't think it's definite, and I don't think it's temporary at all, for that matter.
Thanks for that answer, Yash. So I think, Jaideep, that answers your questions. I think, to quote Scott Adams here, I think he is the guy who made Dilbert the comic strip, and one of my favorite cartoonists out there. He said that, what a lot of things, what takes decades at times happens over, just overnight. And I think with the advent of COVID is what we have seen. And I think, yeah, Zoom is a very good example here, which fits the bill here. Nishtha has more of a comment here, I think, and she says very interesting point on the decline of music streaming because of a decline in commute times. I think, yeah, this is what Yash definitely touched upon. I think if I have to just add on to another insight here, and I'm sure Yash will have something to add to it as well. What we saw was the comparison between apps like, let's say, a Netflix versus an app like YouTube. And YouTube is not like like a whole and whole music streaming app, but it is something an app which you still see for like shorter durations, like in your commute times, if you quickly want to go check out a video or something of that sorts. And what we saw was that the trend for YouTube is also falling down. And that really it really puts into perspective the entire the consumer behavior when it comes to consuming content. How the consumption patterns have shifted towards long form content, right? Like people are taking up to Netflix and Prime and Hotstar much more than these other apps, the music streaming apps, or even apps like YouTube. Yash, I would definitely be interested, your insights to this. What do you feel?
Yeah, I think it's also to do with the lines blurring between what's work and what's your leisure time when you're working from home, right? And a lot of times, I think people are consciously making that effort to completely switch off from work, spend some time at home. I think for a lot of people, I think it's a great time to spend time with family. Probably watch a lot of that long form content. We've also seen explosion in things like people casting things on the screen, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of consumption happening on bigger screens, which
Yeah.
was earlier probably happening on like a mobile device, right? So I think,
Okay.
see, these are I think shifts which are likely to stay here for some time, right? And I think even yeah, music streaming and all of that, I guess that I would see still a bit more temporary. I guess at some point people will still resume back to commuting to office, commuting to work, and I think all of that will resume back again. But yeah, that's at a high level. And I think
Yeah.
we have one more question coming in there, Adi. Do you want to pick that up?
Sure, sure. I think the question is by Tarangini. She says, we know that gaming industry is booming. Have sports media audiences pivoted to gaming, or are the two audiences inherently different? Yes, do you want to take this up, or should I?
Well, sure. I mean, probably I'll just add some color to
Sure.
this. Yeah, I think one of the things that we've definitely noticed is there's been an explosion in the entire real money gaming segment, and all of that, right? So you look at a lot of companies like Jungli Rummy or Ace 23 or the entire Rummy poker, all of that segment. I mean, interestingly, even things like Ludo has completely blown up, right? I mean, I see so many of my friends sending invites for Ludo, right? And I think so. It's not just the sports media audience, but I think a lot of, in general, people looking for ways to de-stress at the end of the day, and looking for some of these online forums to get started with the gaming side of it. And I think people are not at all hesitant to even do gaming with real money as well, right? So on one hand, you have a lot of casual gamers, and I think you also have this entire segment who suddenly come online, and this entire segment's been exploding from what we've seen in the last couple of weeks for sure. Adi, anything to add there?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that we saw from a data perspective is how the activity fell for app like, I think Hotstar. So Hotstar is a OTT which primarily is into streaming of IPL. I think it has kind of a monopoly there, right? Like, because Hotstar has partnered up with HBO and Star, and so most of these sport tournaments that happen across the globe, right? They are like, Hotstar is your platform to be to watch that. And what we saw, interestingly, because of IPL being postponed, that is in March, you could see a stark downfall for Hotstar, right? And that that kind of gives you a perspective, Tarangini, there, that how sports media, the audiences have, though from a consumer point of view, we cannot establish a clear cut intersection there, that these are the people who have diverted. But we do see that there is like, there is definitely a correlation, not so much as a causation here, that you see that the sports media audience is falling, and the gaming is booming. But you can't really say that, okay, this is the audience that's gone here. So I think, yeah, that was my answer to that. I think I will take one more question here, and that question again is for you, Yash. And that question is, how can marketing automation tools can help us in better collaboration from a remote work from home perspective?
Interesting question. I think, see, one of the big things that we've also seen with the entire work from home scenario is that because the teams are remote, earlier what used to happen over one table, you could just discuss the entire strategies with your manager, probably take campaigns live in a matter of minutes, is now all remote. So I think some of the interesting things that we have seen, even as part of usage of our MoEngage platform in itself, is that people are adopting to a lot more collaborative features. Things like, can I sort of build out this entire campaign, and then, with just a click of a button, can I just probably send it to my manager for approval? Once he approves it, can the campaign be launched to production? Or things like can multiple people collaborate on a particular campaign. So for instance, if I am trying to do a promotional email campaign today, so probably my colleague is building out the entire segment, I am doing the entire design of the entire email campaign template. And I think that's where we've seen a lot of our customers as well start using features like some of the features that we have, like teams and everything, where we have people working together within the team to build the campaigns together and then sort of push these campaigns to production. So we see a lot more of these collaborative features being used, and I guess that's where I think they're pushing us as well in terms of how we need to think through in terms of these remote work from home scenarios, and including things like a lot of people now have like patchy internet connections. Like, so how do you solve for those? So yeah, definitely very interesting times, and yeah, I think some of the marketing automation tools have been doing fairly good job in solving for some of these things, and yeah, let's see how this shapes up.
Great thoughts, Yash. There, I think that also brings us to time. With we have kind of overstepped here. It's already 40 minutes here. For our viewers who who joined in late, or you still have questions which needs answering, do drop us a direct message to either to Yash or me, or if you want us to take this over email, just drop us a line at hello@moengage.com. I think it will be yeah, we'll be more than happy to address any of your queries here. And it was terrific to have you today, Yash. I think the session was much insightful, owing to the inputs that you brought in here.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Adi. Thanks for hosting me. Hopefully, we've been able to share some, relevant information for all of you viewers today who joined us. And yeah, I think we were looking to do this on a weekly basis. So please do join us for the next episodes of LinkedIn Live as well. And for people who've missed the entire COVID impact quadrant, I think team has done a fantastic job putting all of this together. So if you've not read it already, please do refer to the report for some of the insights on how a lot of brands have been uh, you know engaging with their customers, what's some of the impacts like, and all of that as well. And if you have any questions, just feel free to message us on LinkedIn directly. Just send a DM and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks everyone, thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Yash.
Thank you.